Daf Yomi, Tractate Zevachim, page 110a. And it's the middle of something, so just go to the bottom of 109b, just to get the thing started, where it says, Rava said to resolve Rabbi Zera's difficulty, Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis agree with regard to the incense of the sanctuary that the Torah does not specify an amount to be burned, and the community fulfills its obligation even if only an olive bulk is burned, as it is taught in the Braita. When they disagree in the Mishnah, it is in the case where, for example, one designated two half pras, portions of incense in accordance with the rabbinic requirement to burn one pras, and now we are on the top of 110a, or Daf today. 110, right? It's with the word bamane. By placing them in a vessel. Marsamar, could be used mane, milsehi, marsavala milsehi. By placing them in a vessel, one sage, Rabbi Eliezer holds that the designation of a measure of incense larger than an olive bulk by placing them in a vessel is a significant matter that renders one obligated to burn all the incense that was placed there. Therefore, one who then burned only an olive bulk of that incense outside the courtyard is exempt. And one sage, the rabbis, holds that it is nothing and does not render one obligated to burn all the incense that was placed in the vessel. Therefore, one who then burned an olive bulk of that incense outside the courtyard is liable. Okay. Viger. One second, do a pointer, be right back. And we're back. I went to get they call it a yad in Hebrew, a pointer. So I can point to the Gemara. Where were we? Okay. I want to see if it doesn't just disturb the, there we go. Okay. Second here. See, pointer, and there you go. So now, you don't have to get in the way. Okay. Where were we? Where were we holding? Liable, right. Amarave. Rava said, Hashtal Bandama, Kivius Demane, Veloklum he, Veloklum who. Kawashish Lapao. Rava said, now, according to the one who says that designation by placing in a vessel is nothing, if one designated in the vessel 6 log of wine as libation to accompany the sacrificing of a bull, which is the required amount, and then removed 4 log from it, and brought those 4 log as a libation outside the courtyard, would he be liable? As a libation of 4 log of wine is fit for the sacrificing of a ram. See Numbers 28:14. Kaba arba la'ayil umashach ben shlosh v'kevan b'chutz chayav sheruyan lekeves. Similarly, if one designated by placing in a vessel 4 log of wine for libation to accompany the sacrificing of a ram, and then removed 3 log of wine from it and brought those 3 log as libation outside the courtyard, he would be liable, as 3 log of wine is a fit libation for the sacrificing of a lamb. See Numbers 28 and verse 14. Okay. But if those 3 logs of wine were lacking any amount, and one brought them as a libation outside the courtyard, he would be exempt because less than 3 logs of wine is never a fit libation. Ravashi Amal Nisuch Mehaktara Lo Yalfin Albanan. Rava inferred from the Braita that the rabbis do not derive the measure for liability for a rite performed in the outer sanctum, meaning the pouring of a libation from one performed in the outer sanctum, meaning the burning of incense. From that he concluded the rabbis would certainly not derive the measure for liability for a rite performed in the inner sanctum from a rite performed in the outer sanctum. This refuted Abaya's claim that the rabbis derived the measure for liability for burning outside the incense of the inner sanctum from the measure for liability for burning outside this incense of the outer sanctum. Ravashi said in defense of Abaya's opinion, instead, as is indicated by the Braita, the rabbis do not derive the measure for liability for pouring a libation outside the courtyard from the measure for liability for burning incense, which are 2 different rites performed in the outer sanctum. Ravashi continues, even though the rabbis do not derive the halachot of a rite performed in the outer sanctum from a different rite performed in the outer sanctum, they do derive the measure for liability for burning the incense of the outer sanctum from the identical rite of burning of the incense of the inner sanctum, even though it involves deriving the halachot of a rite performed in the outer sanctum from one performed in the inner sanctum. After enumerating various items that are burned entirely on the altar, the Mishnah states, and with regard to any of these offerings that were lacking any amount, if one sacrifices it outside the courtyard, he is exempt. Concerning this ruling, a dilemma was raised before the sages. Is a lack that occurs on an offering outside the courtyard considered a lack in order to exempt one who sacrifices the remainder outside the courtyard? Or is it not considered a lack? Okay. Mi amritan do we say, Malia Chasem Malia Sel Oidilma Yoses Vebeneha. In do we say that once an offering emerges from the courtyard, it is as any event disqualified, and yet the Torah deems one liable for offering it there? So what difference is there to me if there is an additional disqualification of being lacking, and what difference is it to me? It's still complete. Or perhaps it is only with regard to emerging from the courtyard where it is still in its original state that yes, one is liable despite the fact that it was disqualified by emerging from the courtyard, but where it is not in its original state, one would not be liable. Amar Abaye, Tashima Rabbi Eliezer Poter, Abaye said, come and hear a resolution from the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer deems him exempt unless he sacrifices the whole of any one of these items outside the temple. It is apparent then that the offering must remain complete. Rabba bar Rav Chanan said to Abaye, can the master resolve the dilemma from the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer? The rabbis disagree with Rabbi Eliezer and hold that one is liable for sacrificing even in olive bulk, and the dilemma was raised according to their opinion. Amar le befeirush shamia li b'nei Rav ad kan lo pligi Rabbanan ale Rabbi Eliezer and ali se b'neiha אבל חסרון מודל אליו דחסר בחוץ, לה דחסר בפנים. Abai said to him, I heard explicitly from Rav that the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Eliezer only where the offering is still in its original form, meaning complete, but where it is lacking, they concede to him that one is not liable. The Gemara attempts to bring a proof from here. Was Rav not referring to a case where it became lacking outside the courtyard? If so, it is evident that even according to the rabbis, a lack that occurs outside is considered a lack. The Gemara rejects this. No, he was referring to a case where it became lacking inside the courtyard. Accordingly, this Mishnah cannot serve as a proof. Tashima Nichulun Shechasu Viklivon Bachutz Patu Lav Dechasar Bachutz La Dechasar Vifnim. The Gemara suggests coming to hear a resolution from the continuation of the Mishnah, and with regard to any of these offerings that were lacking and the amount of sacrifices that outside the courtyard, he is exempt. The Gemara attempts to bring a proof from here. Is the Mishnah not referring to a case where it became lacking outside the courtyard? If so, it is evident that even a lack that occurs outside is considered a lack. The Gemara rejects this. No, it is referring to a case where it became lacking inside the courtyard. Accordingly, this cannot serve as proof. Hamakriv Chadash. Yes. Ken.
Yeah.
Okay. Where were we? Someone knocked at the door, so I had to get it. So I have to go back to where we were. I lost the place. Right, Abai said to I heard from Rav. Okay, it's referring to a case where it became lacking outside the. Okay, I think we were up to we finished the part where it said. I'll just say the part again with Abai. I probably said this already, but I'll say it again. Abai said to him, I heard explicitly from Rav the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Eliezer only where the offering is still in its original form. Yeah, I read this already, but I'll read it again. Why not? Complete, meaning complete. Where it is lacking, they concede to him that one is not liable. The Gemara attempts to bring a proof from here. Was Rav not referring to a case where it became lacking outside the courtyard? If so, it is evident that even according to the rabbis, a lack that occurs outside is considered a lack. The Gemara rejects this. No, he was referring to a case where it became lacking inside the courtyard. Accordingly, the Mishnah cannot serve as proof. Tashima Yechulin Shechasu Viklivon Bachutz Patu Lav Dechasar Bachutz La Dechasar Vifnim. The Gemara suggests coming here a resolution from the continuation of the Mishnah. Okay? From the continuation of the Mishnah. And with regard to any of these offerings that were lacking in any amount, if one sacrifices them outside the courtyard, he is exempt. He is exempt. He is very exempt. The Gemara attempts to bring a proof from here. Is the Mishnah not referring to a case where it became lacking outside the courtyard? If so, it is evident that even a lack that occurs outside is considered a lack. The Gemara rejects this. No, it is referring to a case where it became lacking inside the courtyard. Accordingly, this cannot serve as proof. The Mishnah teaches one who sacrifices sacrificial meat, which is eaten, and sacrificial portions, meaning those that are to be burned on the altar outside the courtyard, is liable for the sacrifice of the sacrificial portions, but not for the meat. The Gemara asks, why is he liable if the meat is placed directly on the altar's fire, and then the sacrificial portions are placed upon the meat? Isn't there an interposition between the altar and the sacrificial portions? Since if they were offered in the temple in that manner, one would not have fulfilled the obligation. One should not be liable if he offers them up in this manner outside the temple. Amar Shmuel, Keshehapachan. Shmuel said the Mishnah is referring to a case where he turned them over and the sacrificial portions lay directly on the altar's fire. Rabbi Yochanan amar afilu tema shelo havachan yamani Rabbi Shimon yamar afilu hele alasela chaya. Rabbi Yochanan said, there is another explanation. You may even say that the Mishnah is referring to a case where they did not turn them over. And in accordance with whose opinion this Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, who says in 108 that even if one offered it up on a rock, he is liable. According to him, it is clear that in order for one to be liable, the mode of offering up performed outside the temple does not need to entirely parallel the mode of offering it up inside the temple. Rav said, there's another explanation. Even in the temple, burning the sacrificial meat and sacrificial portions in this manner would be valid as both items are from the same animal and the substance in contact with the same type of substance is not interposed. And now for the Mishnah. New Mishnah. Finish the Talmud, now new Mishnah. Zog the Mishnah. Mincha shelo nikmitza v'takriva b'chutz patur kamatza b'chazar kumitza letocha hikrivo b'chutz chayav. If there is a meal offering from which a handful was not removed, and one sacrificed outside the temple courtyard, it is exempt from liability, because until the handful is actually removed, it is not fit to be burned on the altar inside the temple. But if a priest took a handful from it and then returned its handful into the remainder of the meal offering, and one sacrificed the entire mixture outside the courtyard, he is liable, as once the handful has been removed, it is fit to be burned on the altar inside the temple, and one is liable for the offering it up outside, even though it is mixed into the remainder. Okay? And now the Talmud. Ve'amai. Okay. Ve'amahai and wahai. The Gemara asked about the final clause, but why is he liable? Let the remainder of the meal offering, which is certainly the majority of the mixture, nullify the handful. Okay? What does it say? Rabbi Zera said a term of burning is stated with regard to the handful removed from the meal offering, and a term of burning is stated with regard to the remainder of the meal offering. Okay, Rabbi Zera said a term of burning is stated with regard to the handful removed from the meal offering, and a term of burning is stated with regard to the remainder of the meal offering. With regard to the handful referred to by the Torah as the memorial part, it is written, and the priest shall burn the memorial part upon the altar, Leviticus 2, verse 2. And with regard to the remainder of the meal offering, it is written, do not burn it as fire to the Lord, Leviticus 2:11. This provides a verbal analogy that teaches that just as with regard to the burning of the handful, if two handfuls are mixed together, one handful does not nullify another. So too, with regard to the burning of the remainder, if the remainder and the handful are mixed together, the remainder does not nullify the handful. Okay? Mishnah. That's the end of the Gemara. Now, new Mishnah. Burning of both the handful and the frankincense permits the consumption of the remainder of the meal offering by the priests. With regard to the handful, the frankincense in the case where one sacrificed only one of them outside the temple courtyard, he is liable. Rabbi Eliezer exempts from liability when it burns only one of them until he also sacrifices the second. since the remainder of the meal offering becomes permitted only once both have been burned, and he considers each one alone to be an incomplete offering, and he holds one is not liable for sacrificing only one of them. Rabbi Eliezer concedes that if one sacrificed one inside the courtyard and outside, and one outside the courtyard, he's liable. Rabbi Eliezer quotes her. The burning of 2 bowls of frankincense permits the consumption of the showbread. With regard to the 2 bowls of frankincense, in a case where one sacrificed only one item outside the courtyard, he is liable. Rabbi Eliezer exempts him from liability. One who burns only one of them until he also sacrifices the second, since the showbread becomes permitted only once both bowls of frankincense are burned. Rabbi Eliezer concedes that if one sacrificed one out inside the courtyard and one outside the courtyard, he is liable. And now for the Talmud. Mahu Shiaz Kenegdo Bashiraim Mishira Shari O Ikalushe Miklash. The Gemara, the Mishnah, is based on the fact that it is permitted for the priest to consume the remainder of the meal offering only once both the handful and the frankincense have been burned. With regard to this, Rabbi Yitzchak Nachman raises a dilemma. If one burned the handful but not the frankincense, what is the halacha with regard to whether this will permit the consumption of the corresponding half of the remainder? Since the burning of both the handful and the frankincense permits the entire remainder, it seems that each one of them affects half of the remainder. Accordingly, it is unclear whether burning one of them will entirely permit half of the remainder, or whether it will merely weaken the prohibition concerning the remainder, and it will still be prohibited to eat any of it. The Gemara asks in accordance with whose opinion did Rabbi Yitzchak Nachman raise this dilemma? If it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says one can render an offering pigul by having pigul intention during half of 2 acts that together permit the offering for consumption, meaning during either one of them, then it should be obvious that the offering of the handful alone should entirely permit half of the remainder. The fact that Rabbi Meir holds that intention during just one of the acts can render the offering pigul demonstrates that he holds that each act alone has the power to permit part of the offering. It is apparent, then, the dilemma was not raised according to Rabbi Meir's opinion. If it is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, who say one cannot render an offering pigul by having pigul intention during half of 2 acts that together permit the offering for consumption, rather one must have pigul intention during both acts, then it is evident that neither act alone has the power to effect the offering, and so the burning of the handful alone should neither permit any of the remainder nor weaken the prohibition that applies to it. It is apparent then the dilemma was not raised according to the rabbi's opinion. Ella aliba de Rabbi Eliezer rather, the dilemma was raised in accordance to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, as taught in the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer rules that one who sacrifices outside only the handful or the frankincense is not liable. Evidently, he holds that neither of these alone can permit the consumption of the meal offering. The Gemara rejects this suggestion as well. Rabbi Eliezer holds in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis who say one cannot render an offering pigul by having pigul intention during half of 2 acts that together permit the offering for consumption. Accordingly, he would hold that the offering of only the handful neither permits any of the remainder nor weakens the prohibition concerning it, and it would not make sense to raise the dilemma according to him. Rather, it must be that the dilemma was raised in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. It is taught here in the Mishnah. They hold that one is liable even for sacrificing outside only the handful, or only the frankincense. Evidently, they hold that each one alone has the power to affect the status of the remainder. Accordingly, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafka asked concerning a case where one of them is burned on the altar in the temple. What is the halacha? Does it entirely permit half of the remainder, or does it weaken the prohibition concerning the entire remainder? So the Gemara remains with Teku. It says, the Gemara concludes, this dilemma shall stand unresolved until the coming of the Messiah, maybe soon in our day. And this would be the 226th Teku in the Babylonian Talmud, according to my counting, which is really the counting of Rabbi Aharon Yehoshua Pessin, who made a book called Teku. But I'm also following that idea to count all the Tekus. Okay, and now we start the Mishnah, and we'll continue with the next Amud in the next video. God willing. Okay, Mishnah. Zoyrek Miksas Damachutz. The Mishnah says, one who sprinkles part of the blood of an offering, for example, one sprinkling instead of 4 outside the temple courtyard,